There's something automatic about people who always step into the caretaker role in every relationship they enter. Maybe it's the way they can detect emotional discomfort in a room before anyone else acknowledges it. Maybe it's how they respond to others' needs before processing their own. Or maybe it's that specific combination of attentiveness and responsibility that seems almost embedded into how they relate to people. Because always playing the caretaker isn't about being too nice or lacking boundaries. It's about operating from a survival mechanism that researchers are only now connecting to early relational conditioning. And trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to see why the very pattern that exhausts you is also proof of an emotional intelligence most people never develop. Let's start with something most people never notice about how caretakers process other people's emotional states. Watch a caretaker closely in a social setting, and you'll see something that most people overlook. They are not simply being helpful, they are regulating the entire environment, often without saying a word. They notice when someone looks uncomfortable. They sense when a conversation is becoming tense. They detect subtle emotional shifts long before anyone else realizes something has changed. Caretakers don't wait for someone to ask for support. They anticipate the need before it appears. This anticipation isn't conscious. It's automatic, almost reflexive. Their attention moves outward before it moves inward, scanning the emotional landscape like it's second nature. Most people interpret this as kindness or generosity. But for those who live inside this pattern, it feels more like a responsibility, a silent expectation they didn't choose but learned to carry. Caretakers often enter a room and immediately gauge the emotional climate. They adjust their tone depending on who's present. They soften themselves for the sensitive person, brighten for the low-energy person, and stay neutral for the ones who drain easily. They shapeshift, not to deceive, but to keep the environment steady. This creates a subtle internal divide. They're participating in the group, but they're also managing it. This dual awareness can make them seem grounded and dependable, yet internally it can feel like they're juggling roles, constantly calibrating themselves to sustain emotional equilibrium. And because this caring response is so fast and so practiced, most caretakers don't even notice they're doing it. It simply feels like the right thing to do, even when it costs them energy. Then there's the pattern of stepping in quietly, consistently, automatically. Someone forgets something, they remember. Someone struggles, they assist. Someone falters emotionally, they hold space. These individuals rarely ask, "Should I help?" Their instinct answers before the question forms. Their attention naturally gravitates toward what's unstable, uncomfortable, or unresolved. Not because they seek control, but because they've learned that stability often depends on them. And this habit goes deeper than behavior. It shapes how they form relationships. Caretakers often attract people who take more than they give, not intentionally, but because caretakers broadcast an unspoken signal, "I will absorb the emotional weight." Over time, caretakers internalize this as identity. They believe their value comes from being the one who steadies, supports, reassures. But beneath that identity is an overlooked truth. The caretaking reflex wasn't chosen. It was shaped through early relational experiences where caring became the price of safety, harmony, or acceptance. Here's the moment where everything becomes clear. People who always step into the caretaker role don't decide to become the emotional anchor of every environment. They anticipate it before anyone asks for help, before tension rises, before a problem is visible to others. Their mind is already scanning for instability. Psychologists call this predictive caretaking, a form of hyper-attunement developed in environments where emotional safety depended on how well you could read others. Instead of waiting for someone's mood to spill outward, these individuals learned to detect the earliest signs of distress. Their brain became a quiet warning system, constantly monitoring the emotional atmosphere for anything that might escalate. This is the twist most people never recognize. Caretakers aren't driven by a desire to control others. They're driven by a desire to prevent emotional damage, often damage they once had to manage alone. Their childhood or early social environments may have taught them a subtle but powerful rule. If I can keep others calm, I stay safe. So what looks like kindness is often something deeper. What looks like patience is often practiced vigilance. What looks like generosity is often self-protection expressed through service. This is where role conditioning begins. Over time, the caretaker becomes the one everyone relies on, not because they asked for it, but because they've already shaped themselves to fit that role. Relationships start forming around their stability. Group dynamics lean on their quiet organization. They become the emotional regulator in spaces where no one else wants the job. But this adaptation comes with a hidden cost. Caretakers rarely experience being cared for in return. Their identity becomes tied to usefulness. Their presence becomes associated with support. And slowly, without realizing it, they learn to show up for others before ever checking what they themselves need. By adulthood, this turns into co-regulation scripting. The belief that they must absorb emotional tension, smooth conflicts, offer solutions, or carry burdens to keep relationships intact. And because they've been practicing this since early life, they often do it so seamlessly that others assume the caretaker is naturally strong, naturally calm, naturally available. But internally, they know a different truth. Their body reacts to other people's emotions before their mind even registers the shift. Their instincts fire faster than their boundaries. Their empathy activates before their needs can speak. This is the core mechanism. Caretaking isn't a choice. It's a survival pattern that became an identity. And once you see the pattern clearly, every moment of automatic responsibility starts to make sense. Not as weakness, not as overgiving, but as an adaptation shaped long before adulthood ever arrived. Here is where the entire pattern becomes clear. People who always play the caretaker in social groups, relationships, and family systems share a psychological mechanism most of them never recognize because it feels less like something they do and more like something they are. For these individuals, caretaking isn't a role, it's a reflex. Long before adulthood, their nervous system learned that the safest way to move through the world was to anticipate the needs of others. Not out of kindness, not out of moral virtue, but because in the environments that shaped them, being attuned to others was the most reliable way to prevent conflict, reduce unpredictability, or maintain connection. This is the part most people misunderstand. Caretakers aren't trying to be heroes. They aren't trying to be selfless. They are responding to an old internal rule. If I meet others' needs first, nothing bad happens. Psychologists call this anticipatory emotional labor, a pattern where someone scans others' emotional states automatically, searching for tension, discomfort, or potential harm. They adjust themselves before anyone asks. They help before anyone notices the need. They carry burdens that were never theirs because they learned early that being useful meant being safe. What looks like generosity is often survival. And what looks like calm competence often hides chronic hyper-awareness. Caretakers intuitively know when someone is shutting down, irritated, disappointed, overwhelmed. They step in without thinking, smoothing over dynamics, absorbing emotion, filling gaps, solving problems. People describe them as selfless, empathetic, nurturing, but underneath those traits is something more complex. They were trained to disappear so others wouldn't. This is what defines the caretaker pattern. Their identity becomes tied to their ability to stabilize the emotional environment. If everyone else is okay, they can relax. If someone is not okay, their nervous system activates, not out of empathy alone, but out of learned responsibility. In many cases, this begins in households where one or more adults were unpredictable, stressed, emotionally unavailable, or inconsistent. The child learned to scan the room, interpret subtle cues, and intervene silently, becoming the emotional regulator the adults could not be. As adults, they are still regulating rooms that no longer need regulating. This creates the paradox that defines the caretaker's experience. They are indispensable to everyone around them, but rarely known beyond their usefulness. People rely heavily on them, but few ever ask what it costs. This is why caretakers often feel invisible. Not because others don't appreciate them, but because caretaking is the version of themselves they believe is most acceptable, most welcomed, most safe. It's not their nature, it's their adaptation. And once this becomes clear, their entire relational experience can finally be understood. People who always play the caretaker often reach adulthood, carrying a quiet truth they rarely say out loud. They don't know who they are when they're not needed. Their identity was built around usefulness, around being the steady one, the reliable one, the one who solves the problem before anyone else notices it exists. And this creates a final paradox. Caretakers navigate the world with a kind of invisible strength. They anticipate needs before they're spoken. They stabilize emotional environments without drawing attention to themselves. They carry responsibility as if it were instinct. But beneath that steady exterior is a question they've asked for years, even if only silently. If I stop giving, will anyone stay? This is where everything connects, the moment where the internal logic of their behavior finally reveals its emotional shape. Caretakers aren't driven by a desire to control. They're driven by a desire to remain connected. And for people whose early lives taught them that connection must be earned through service, the habit never fully disappears. Even in adulthood, they fear being too much if they have needs, or not enough if they don't offer something in return. But here's the part that begins to rewrite their entire internal script. Caretakers often don't realize that their presence alone already holds value. People rely on their calmness, their insight, their steadiness, not just the labor they perform. The emotional support they provide is meaningful, yes, but the person providing it matters more than the service itself. Their worth isn't transactional. It never was. Yet recognizing this requires something they rarely give themselves: space. Space to pause before rescuing. Space to differentiate between real responsibility and reflexive responsibility. Space to let silence exist without filling it with solutions. In that pause, something subtle shifts. They begin to see the difference between support and self-erasure. This is the final psychological insight. Caretakers don't just protect others. They protect the relationship itself. Their instinct to step in is an instinct to preserve connection. But the people who genuinely care for them don't want a caretaker. They want them present, equal, human, imperfect. And once a caretaker realizes this, the entire dynamic changes. They start choosing where to invest energy rather than automatically absorbing the emotional weight of every environment. They begin forming relationships that don't depend on sacrifice to survive. They notice who checks on them. They notice who listens back. They notice who stays when they're not holding everything together. So yes, people who always play the caretaker are different, not because they're stronger or kinder than everyone else, but because their emotional wiring was built in places where steadiness became survival. Now, the work shifts from carrying everything to understanding what's worth carrying and who is willing to carry something with them. And if you recognize yourself in this pattern, there's a good chance you share another trait that shapes your relationships just as strongly. One will unravel in the next topic of this series.